Hi, I'm here today. My name is Marshall Sponder. I'm here to talk about digital analytics, digital marketing analytics path of value. And this is really based on the book that I lead wrote with Gohar F. Khan, but most of it's my work and some of his later chapters. It's published at late 2017, and I'm going to give a 1 to 2 hour talk. I'll probably break this particular set, these videos, into two videos simply because it's going to be too long. But this will be the equivalent of a 2 hour talk. So everything I talk about today is going to be covered much more detail in my textbook. And the purpose really of this book was to create a way for organizations and individuals to connect the dots and to assess their own development and process and determine what they need to do next. And as an educator, I really care about people learning and growing, both individually, growing in their lives, growing in their courses. So, and I always wanted to see that represented visually. So I wrote a book that I thought was as inclusive, and I invited Gohar to come in as a co-author with me towards the end of the process, as inclusive as it could be, but also gave marketers the way to assess where they were at and where their competitors might be as well, and vendors. There's a lot in here, and we're going to fly through it in about 90 minutes. But if you want to know more about what's in the book and go deeper into this, I suggest you get a copy of the book, both either as a soft cover or in electronic form, because it exists in both. It also exists in hardcover, but I don't recommend that because it's more expensive, and honestly, it doesn't necessarily offer much difference. It's just a hard copy more for libraries. The reason I can write about this is I teach, I have a dual appointment at both Zicklin School of Business and Rutgers University. I'm a lecturer at Zicklin School of Business, and I am an associate professor of professional practice at Rutgers. I teach digital marketing courses in both places, but my particular focus at Zicklin Baruch is web analytics and internet marketing and text analytics more recently. And at Rutgers, it is a course called Social Media for the Arts that's almost going into its 7th year, where it continues to get more popular and expand into a bigger and bigger audience. So we'll explore all of that with the touch points of a lot of the courses I teach and what Gohar teaches in the 90 minutes, which encompasses as well these two videos. We know that digital marketing is really where it's at. It's been at because of all the work people and all the presence that's online. And we've been pretty good at Baruch at putting all this together and creating a digital marketing program. I think we're rated probably one of the best public colleges, #1 actually in the nation. We're the best colleges for the money, and I would say who doesn't care about that? Our education here is currently $6,000 or $7,000 a year for a student. At NYU, it's probably around $50,000, and in other places it might be far more than that. And yet I feel for a directed student, they get, a lot for the value. However, we might, certainly what we might find is that we need a directed student to get the most out of the resources that we have. And so we want to create, but we want to, as educators, create information that is easy to use and build off of. And I feel I've put my life work into doing that, and helping it be happening more for students so they can connect the dots. So the whole book was written with that idea in mind. At Zicklin School of Business, we have in the digital marketing program, we have 5 we have 5 cores of our digital marketing program, and then a bunch of electives. The book really in digital analytics for marketing focuses on web analytics, internet marketing, and a lot text analytics with smatterings of digital advertising, SEO, and social media and content. We certainly have a lot more than could be fit into any book, such as law and the internet, direct and interactive marketing, and so on. And the directed student really can kind of weave whatever specialty they want by combining these things. We have a one-day boot camp that I teach in January every year to students just interested in our digital marketing program from other majors and other schools at Zicklin. And that's where we focus on those things. Now, at Rutgers, I've really focused on one thing, which is originally helping artists figure out how to market themselves, but then it became a much more ambitious undertaking of actually helping anyone really understand the world as it is today, the digital world, and what to do with all this data that's being generated and how to understand what one has to say and how one could best do it. So right now that course continues to grow, which I'm very happy about, and I continue to teach it and inspire it and direct it. I even have a Facebook page around it called Social Media for the Arts, and certainly I now probably have taught close to 10,000 students this, and I think we probably get 5 to 10% of the entire enrollment at Rutgers during a academic year in the course, and that continues to grow. So I'm very happy about that. So in this presentation today, we're really going to look at 12 different paths of value that mirror what's in the book. Just highlights, nuggets of information in the book. You'll need to buy the book, and anyone that takes my courses or Gohar's courses should probably buy the book, and I hope a lot of other people buy the book, because honestly, we take out from any course that you take, we take that information out and expand it into a lot of different areas beyond the course, like text analytics. We pull in web analytics, we put in internet marketing, we pull in customer intelligence, and a lot of other things. With web analytics, we do the same. With social media and social media analytics and social media for the arts, the Rutgers course, I think this book would be extremely beneficial for, because it aligns with a lot of other stuff at the business school and a lot of other things across Rutgers. But, I think for any university and for many businesses, I think our book, I would like to think we've written the best book. I would like to think that. And I actually think we have. And not only that, we have an instructor's guide with all the PowerPoints of all of the chapters, plus a lot of exercises and research papers and so on. And while I don't think we even scratched what we could have created, I think we have quite a lot. And so I'm going to start with the first one. The first nugget of value here, the first path of value, is internet marketing. It is also our Marketing 4555 course, which is currently remote. I teach it remotely. I think a couple of other instructors might teach it hybrid. And, it really all starts with the data. Like, the data is all unstructured or structured or semi-structured. And the truth of the matter is that we have a lot of data that's being generated all the time in the world. But how do we use that data? So as you see by the diagram here, we have the structured data that we're used to in spreadsheets, rows and columns. And then we have the other extreme, which is the gobbledygook. they're nothing. Everything's thrown together. And obviously, actually, for the marketer, we actually see that more often than not, that's what we have is a lot of gobbledygook data that we don't know what to do with. We didn't realize we had, or we never collected it. And so the challenge is how much of this data that's unstructured that we now realize we can collect, can we actually, is it worth spending time to try to organize, and how would we organize it? So I think that's the dilemma of today's marketer. Like you guys could see, from the 1950s when we first really had computers, in the old days there were these big computer rooms. I worked in some of these early in my career, and I even helped to put together some of these machines. I can tell whole stories about that. And I'm sure a lot of places still have some of these machines running, but when programs were written back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, big data vendors like IBM and many of the others that ceased to exist anymore, everything had to be really organized very well, and the computer operations were very specialized. And it produced data that was organized and could be used in eventually what happened with the era in the 1980s of the personal computer, the first personal computers, and then mobile technology and the internet and browsers. The world became a jungle with a vast amount of data that's being generated, so much so that we can no longer process and keep track of it anymore. And so the modern marketer has so much to deal with in terms of figuring out how to use this information and how much is worth collecting and whether they even have what they need. That, as you can see, most of the data that's actually being generated now is unstructured. Obviously what you really want to move to is something that can be easily reused for other things, and so you probably want to store a lot of the data, put effort into creating semi-structured data. The problem is that most of our platforms that we use for marketing that are commercially available, like the Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics, are really designed only for structured data. And the vendors have really figured out how to collect that data on websites and then organize it around the activities of the website. Unfortunately, it turns out that data, because of it's been structured and because it's limited to what was being of deemed value to collect, usually doesn't have the information or enough of the information that's actually needed to be useful to the modern marketers. So we have the dilemma that these tools are very important and powerful, but at the same time they're very incomplete. And so as we live in the world of more data that we can record everything, we come up with a paradigm that we actually have less data than we thought. Though in some ways we were better off before when we were ignorant and didn't realize we had this data, or we didn't just have it because we weren't generating it yet. But now we live in an age where we have all of this data that we can't do anything with. And yes, this is just a little screen recording thing. So it caused me to think about this term, data is the new oil. It's really digital, unstructured digital data that's the new oil. Well, it's not even just digital, it's any data. Any data is the new oil, but particularly this unstructured data that we just talked about. If we can figure out how to collect enough of it, and if we can figure out how to best organize it, we're in a really good shape to get some additional intelligence in direction of what we would do next. So I've given a couple of examples here. I won't go over them, but in the effort of time. But when we go on, we see that we have a number of different types of platforms we can use in digital marketing, such as web analytics and text analytics and search analytics, to organize our marketing and to hyper target our display advertising, which can manifest in many different ways, which we cover in the book. So if you really want to know more about these things, look at the book. Viral marketing is a big subject in my Social Media for the Arts course. I have a whole section on it. Obviously, viral marketing is tough because to figure out what goes viral, you have to, first of all, viral seems to be something that sort of happens almost on its own, but the truth of the matter is viral marketing, or basically creating a piece of content that your audience loves and keeps on sharing over and over again but doesn't cost you any more money, turns out to be incredibly hard to do. And most of the time now, it's no accident that it happens at all. It's almost paid advertising. It often costs a lot of money to create good content that's going to be shared and to target it properly and seed it properly. The word seeding is something I introduced in my Social Media for the Arts course. You almost have to create and fan the fire of these things to happen. In fact, the case in point, a very well-known case in point, is the Academy Awards of 2014, where Ellen DeGeneres took a selfie and ended up that selfie wasn't just an accident. She took a selfie with a bunch of other celebrities. That selfie turned out to be extremely beneficial to Samsung. She was taking it with a Samsung camera. It actually generated $1 billion of what they thought was earned media. Media they didn't have to pay for, basically, but if they had paid for it, it would have cost them $1 billion. We are, whether that's really money anyone would have paid for, it created a value that they didn't pay for. But yet this was prearranged. The whole shoot was prearranged, and Ellen was probably paid for it. And the details of that was in an article that I, actually found. So when we talk about viral media, it was great that it was viral, but it certainly wasn't something that's going to happen without planning and so on. Another way to get advertising is social media. And in social media, we often have something called native advertising, which is advertising that looks as if it was in a news feed. Because of that, it tends to not be looked at as advertising, which has its pluses and minuses. Most of the social media platforms, including Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, they all have versions of this. And obviously, we're seeing that the spending in digital media is going up and traditional media going down, but the spend for things like search engine marketing, for example, are going down as social media marketing and YouTube advertising and other forms of digital media advertising are going up. And what I will say is that we have an assessment in the book. We have assessments for most of the paths of value, and we have what we call a website assessment that lets anyone assess their maturity in putting together a website program. And usually these assessments are radar charts, and there's a bunch of questions you have to answer. We get these through Demand Metrics. I had originally wanted to put a lot of these together myself. I realized that with writing a book that took me 3 years, and which I only invited Gohar in at the end in the last year for some of the later chapters for the most part, it was a lot to figure out what the questions would be, and then how to best represent them in charts. And finally, I came across a company called Demand Metrics that have done a lot of that work. So rather than doing what had already been done, I utilized a tool that, while not perfect for everything I wanted to talk about in the book, it did have a lot of pre-existing assessments. And so I decided to leverage their assessments for many of the things. And so you'll see many of them in this presentation. And so now we go to the next one, the SEO, SEM passive value. So the second path of value we cover in the book is SEO, SEM. And there's two types, organic and paid. And most of you are familiar with both. We know that there's more visibility when your search results appear near the top the first results that you can get when you do a search. And searches are very directed. Obviously, people know what they are looking for, have an idea. So if what you have is what they're looking for and they can recognize it, obviously they're not going to look beyond the first or second page, but mostly not beyond the first page. And so there's been a lot of effort in the last 25 so years to be on the top, top of the results, and that's not so easy. But it certainly, we have this chart here that says 31%. 31% of the people that are looking or searching for using a keyword or a key phrase, if you're the first result, you might be clicked on 31% of the time on average. And the truth of the matter is that it's a little harder to figure out what's the first result is anymore, because Google has inserted paid advertising that looks very similar to organic advertising, and other types of enhancements that kind of mix up the boundaries of paid and organic together, so it makes it hard. So we know that we really need to. So sometimes, though, even though a lot of effort in the past have been put on search engine optimization because it brings a lot of visitors and you don't pay for it. You really are paying for it in the sense that you have to spend a lot of time doing it and you have to have good content, and that takes time, energy, and money ultimately to do. And you don't always know exactly how that's going to manifest and how long that's going to be good as search engines keep on changing what they're doing and changing their algorithms. What you did one day may not work another day. They may decide to go after something so different, and all your efforts may eventually not pan out. So marketers are encouraged thereby by the search engine to pay for the results they want and to focus on where they want to go. And of course they can bid on the amount of money they want to pay for a search term and the audience they're going after and the countries and so on. And then the search engine's able to hyper target more or less what they're looking for. And of course the skill there then is knowing how to figure out what to tell the search engine you want it to do with the advertising. But you have a lot more control, and really ultimately you want to combine both. So I have a little chart here that kind of compares the differences between the two, and you can explore that in the book, and also a lot of the elements of SEO, which we cover in the Marketing 455 course at Zicklin School of Business. And we have an assessment called the SEO Maturity Assessment from Demand Metrics that kind of assesses the SEO part of it, like how much are you really thinking about your keywords and your management of the keywords and the process and the automation and the skills buy-in. So that's worth exploring if you go to Demand Metrics to get it. And some of those that buy the textbook, we have some of these assessments that we allow instructors to share with students. We've gotten permission for some of them for Demand Metrics, but generally speaking, anything we talk about here, there may be some that you'll just want to go directly to Demand Metrics, and if you're so interested, become a paid member. Now, programmatic is something that's an offshoot of digital marketing, and it's really basically algorithmic-driven marketing. It stems out of the need to be more precise and automate digital marketing till it gets just to the people who need to see it, and also to kind of simplify buying and selling of advertising so that we less and less depend on people and more on programs, because it was found that a lot of the cost of the digital advertising was being eaten up by direct marketing teams on different sides of the equation that were slowing down things and sort of making them more and more expensive and not adding that much value out of it. And so in 2008, after the financial collapse recession that happened, banks and other entities were thinking about was there a way to take advertising and treat it the same way we treat money and derivatives on Wall Street, and create algorithms to, kind of trade eyeballs and so on and so forth. And it sounds somewhat really strange to think of it that way, but actually most companies are now using programmatic advertising systems to both formulate and serve out their marketing, and buyers are looking at programmatic to figure out which advertising to put where, to which publisher's website, and so on. So we're finding these systems are proliferating and spreading, and because of that, now we are thinking that Madison Avenue has become Wall Street, doing the same kind of algorithmic planning that the traders are doing. And in fact, you can even have trading desks based on advertising with buy and sell side. I won't even go into this. You want to understand more, buy the book. And there's different parts of this ecosystem. There's even these Luma charts that show all the different companies that are vying and what they do. And we're not going to get into that, because this is, we're just really high level here in this talk. But, if you want to understand these things and how they impact your marketing, and, feel free to pick up the book. But because we have what we call data, and I've divided it, and I'll explain what first, second, and third party data is a little later on in this presentation, you have the ability to really target your content and get it to the right people at the right time, and an acceptable cost, and more likelihood, because it's customized, and it's, if the potential of this is realized by collecting personal data, which I know a lot of you have very heated feelings about, but if it's used, constructively and positively and not invasively, it can really make a big difference. And, certainly that's been sold that way by the programmatic vendors, and it can be used in a number of different formats, which are listed here. And then we have an assessment for that. It's called the programmatic, it's not there's no assessment from Demandmetric on programmatic, and I think they don't even really have that vocabulary at all, although programmatic really is, and retargeting are a form of direct marketing, and as a matter of fact. So it's strange that they don't have that, but we do have an assessment for that. It's a vendor assessment, because in most cases, most organizations are going to need help implementing programmatic. It takes usually several months to set up a trading desk for it, and you really need to understand the different parts of the organization and the content, and often publishers will do it, but advertisers often need to use programmatic trading desks. Agencies certainly often have it. So it's just a push to automate everything and make things move faster and faster. Whether that's a good thing or not, we can debate, but that is how it is. And we need to prepare our students, and companies need to prepare for that. So there you go. Now, finally, we've got this web optimization. We know that in the digital marketing, we need a lot of different ways to reach our consumers and customers. In this case, I just happen to have a diagram that looks at pay-per-click, but in reality, I have here 16 different ways, like social media, affiliate marketing, mobile marketing, programmatic, online articles, landing page, marketing order. To be honest with you, they all kind of mesh together. You need analytics around these things. You need a strategy to deploy them, and what you need to do research, and you need to have some way to take that customer from where they first touch your brand and all the way down to becoming a loyal customer. And so all of these things kind of need to be happening. And of course, we have the spreadsheets and the assessments to help you figure this all out, and help students get up to speed with figuring these things all out in the book. In fact, here's another one. We have a content marketing assessment from Demandmetric that looks at how well we're putting together our content. Because at the end of the day, web optimization, or making sure that the customer sees what they're supposed to see and what you want them to see and do what you want them to do on the web, wherever they see it, and in social media, wherever they see it, is about having the content ready for them to see, being able to prepare it. So the question is, are you ready to get involved in that? Do you understand what your needs are? And so the spreadsheet kind of helps you do that. Finally, we go into another set here, the first, second, and third-party data that I promised to talk about. And, the first-party data really is that information that we have as a business that we collect on our customers. That could be, typically that could be the customer relationship manager data, but that could also be web analytics data. When it's a digital asset, we're talking about collecting the first party. We usually have a first party cookie that is issued by the website collecting that data, and it's usually connected with a login of some kind that you had to do. Then we have this third party data, which is really other sites that are just collecting data as you visit them. And issuing a cookie to the browser. And then, there are the data vendors brokers that collect all your movements throughout the web, which I know infuriates some people. And that's a third-party cookie. And these cookies can be deleted or they can be blocked, and that might. But then there's a two-edged sword of that. If you block these cookies, then you're not able to, necessarily harvest the data that comes from knowing won't be able to target very well. And that might be okay for the customers that don't want their data harvested. But also remember that much of the automation and the richness of the Web 3.0 and 4.0 depend on the collection of these cookies, to work. So if you block too much of this stuff, then the promise of the web to deliver what you want, it gets blocked too. Now, the second party data is the data that is collected usually from an affiliate or business partner, and then shared with their partner, basically. So usually credit cards and banks collect data they may share with their affiliates. That might be considered to be second-party data when it's given to the affiliate and vice versa. And usually it's in fine print, and some of this you can block and some of it you can't. We all know that story. Anyway, the biggest problem, though, with this third-party data that is very prevalent for targeting is that, and for data enrichment, is it's not interoperable. Every vendor that collects the data does their own operations on it, their own deduplication on it, their own filtering of it, and their own data structures. And that means that they may have their secret sauce and create bias in it that you would never know about. Only they would know about it potentially. And as you mix up this data with your data, you're introducing bias that you probably don't understand. There's no way to check for. And if you mix too much of this stuff up together, your data gets more and more inaccurate, and I would consider that dirty data. So I think the best advice I could give anybody is to use this data very sparingly and to present it side by side, but don't try to combine anything you get in, say, a ComScore or a Nielsen with your first party data. Trying to do these things is just, it won't, in a lot of cases, the data is not going to match up with any similar stats that you're collecting from web analytics or from your own customer data. And it'll just create doubt, but it won't be usually something that you can easily enrich. It'll create a lot of work and it won't really be that useful. So that's my advice. And we give some examples in the book of companies that are, doing these things with the data, that they're combining it and doing that. We use a lot of ComScore My Metrics in my courses, and at Baruch we have several seats for that. And while we don't give that much specific assignments on it, I think students get an idea of the kind of things they can do with these tools. And they're very valuable for understanding the industry, for understanding competitors, and really everybody's on the same playing field. And when I was involved in using my metrics and other tools like that in private industry and other jobs that I've had, I found that they were very useful for corporate marketing and useful to have a constructive conversation with other competitors where you weren't sharing your actual first-party data, but you were able to have a debate on who was top dog, so to speak, based on this third-party data where everybody's kind of more or less treated equally. So it may be equally inaccurate for everybody, but the reality is that at least you're not sharing your own personal data. You're just getting the syndicated data that you're paying from a third-party vendor. And it's very expensive. And obviously, you want to understand your needs for third-party data before you go out and buy it. So we have an assessment called the Research Conclusion Prioritization Tool that's from Demand Metrics that, just understand what it is that you need, because obviously the vendor you go to is going to make a big difference. And then you want to evaluate the vendors that might be offering the kind of data, third-party data you're looking for, and figure out which one is the best one for you. And that's another tool. Now we go into web analytics, which is one of the main courses I teach and authored at Zicklin School of Business. Why do we use it? Well, everybody knows Google Analytics, so we use it to optimize websites. The main use case for web analytics is user design and site conversion to understand, to optimize. And it's also good for advertising as well, because we need to understand, and SEO, to understand the impact of the keywords that are coming to our website. Most web analytics tools, they all provide first-party data to those sites they're monitoring, and they use a first-party cookie to do that. But I don't recommend that we become too mesh just in the web analytics, because most digital marketers need to wear several hats. We do need to have web analytics. Every business probably needs it for their digital presence. And the best thing to do is to understand what you're trying to collect. And then you need to understand your customer and whether you're meeting the goals of the customer and whether you're also getting your own points across. And then you need to make changes to make all those things happen. So you need to understand what you're trying to do, and then what your strategies are, and then what you need to create metrics and segmentation and be able to measure whether your targets are being met. And usually that's kind of like a process that gets repeated over and over again. And generally speaking, this works well for businesses that are more mature, that kind of know what they want to achieve, and have a very clear idea how that's done already, and then are willing to play around with trying things and then seeing how they work and then trying them again. We have something called key business requirement and then a key performance indicator, and I tend to think it's better to layer them. That's my own personal view, and that's also the view of many who teach web analytics. And obviously we get some things out of the box with tools like Google Analytics, but they don't tend to be particularly useful, and we talk a lot about that in the book, unless we can customize them to our own business. And of course, in order to customize anything, you have to understand what your needs are, which means you need to go through an introspective process. And, generally speaking, you need to identify stakeholders, and you need to do a lot of different process work, essentially, that many times is not well represented by the vendors that are selling you these products and platforms. And it's also time-consuming and expensive, and it works best when you're making money, and you're making a lot of money, and you want to make more money and continue to make the money. And obviously you need to make the investment to understand how you're making that money and whether you're making it. And it doesn't work so well for the bodega or the business that, doesn't really have the resources or the time to really think about these things and doesn't have so much stake in it. So we don't find web analytics really delivers much value to a lot of small and intermediate businesses if they haven't gone through this process for themselves. And where it does provide value is when, direct marketing, advertising, marketing, publishing. Essentially, the business was created for, but unfortunately, most businesses don't survive that way, or fortunately. And so the metrics that come out of the analytics aren't particularly helpful or leading to any great understanding or improvement. So while they've been hyped and sold by Google and other vendors, I think a lot more introspection is needed. And you definitely need to create measures or key performance indicators that work for your business. They don't have to work for any other businesses. As long as they work for your business, that's the only thing that really counts here. Because they're not extensible that way. And as much as it'd be nice to have an extensible metrics that work for everybody, we're not living in that world today. We're probably not going to get there. And so my book covers really why it is and isn't possible to do that. But it's a lot harder. Configuring these tools is much harder. I mean, there are some in the digital analytics field and the web analytics field that say that web analytics is easy, such as Avinash Koshak. And there are others like Eric Peterson that would say it was very hard in the past. The reality is it's both. It's both easy and hard. I think Google has made it seem like everybody can be a web analyst. They just put Google Analytics on there and that's it, and you're going to see and you're going to get insights. And the truth of the matter is, yes, that's true. You can put the Google Analytics in there and you can have dashboards and you can look at other people's dashboards. But the reality is, it's very hard because when you realize that every business succeeds and every organization succeeds for unique things that it does that also, somewhat similar to what others do, but are unique enough that they need to stand apart. So then they need to understand their processes in order to do that. And that means a lot of customization in the analytics so they can tune that. Most people don't want to spend the money or the time or even understand what that is. So the real problem, what we have with web analytics, it was designed in a 1996 world and then tried to adapt to the changes in the last 22 years or so. And while it has considerably grown, it can't really get to where marketing is today. And marketing doesn't just happen on a website, it happens all over the web. And so the metrics that are built into the original web analytics, which are still largely the same, are useless, really, for the kinds of things that marketers care about today for the most part. Because that's not well represented by the vendors, but the truth of the matter is that, and this comes from a quote by Gary Angel, who is one of my favorite people in web analytics. One of the biggest problems today is the fragmentation of the customer across all these different channels, which are, again, fragmentation, where they're going back and forth. So we do need to track them across these channels, which, again, goes into the privacy issue. And consequently, we're running into the problem of how do we put all this data together on the other platforms, of which web analytics only is capturing what's going on the website and what immediately preceded it, where they came from, and if there's a link where they're going to, but nothing else pretty much for any other thing that's happening. So yes, you could collect this data, but then figure out how to put it all together, and a lot of it's not that useful, doesn't line up that well. It's very intensive, and then there's more data all the time. So you've got this fragmentation that makes it very hard. But the view of Google Analytics and some of the other analytics vendors is just make everybody go to your website and then you can use the analytics. And that would be all fine if it really did work that way. Because if you could get everybody just to go to your website and that's the only place they went from wherever they reached you, then you could use these powerful Ginsu knife filters, so to speak, and chop down everything to a lot of different levels and then, hone in. And certainly web analytics was designed to do that. And you can spend a lot of time building very precise segmentation and filtering to just see exactly what you want to see. And that's the most powerful tool that web analytics has. But bear in mind that in order to get to that, you've got to get the people to your website. And the vast majority of social media and everything that's meaningful that's happening on the web isn't happening on your website. So you have this real dilemma that no matter how good you are at getting people to your website, much of what you want to focus on and look at is not happening on your website, and it's happening in other places, and some of it's even offline, but you still want it. So it's fine if you get them to your website. You can do very precise segmentation, and you can use Boolean logic, and as I show you here, and get exactly what you want. But your problem is that most of what you want to look at is not going to be happening on your website. So you're going to be stuck there, and then the web analytics really can't tell a lot about why people are coming. You can design your website with UX to kind of help to make it easier to figure that out. But at the end of the day, these tools came from a different world than what we're living in, and you'll find you'll need to use them all. And we cover that in the book. I mean, that's why you should pick up a copy. And so we, how adept is the user in understanding what they actually need to do? So we have a marketing measurement maturity chart, an assessment from Demand Metrics that helps a marketer figure this out, and then I can see where they are, and then there's some suggestions that are built into the spreadsheet. Again, I didn't create the spreadsheet, but I'm using Demand Metrics stuff because the effort of writing a book over 3 years and then putting all this information, distilling it, synthesizing it, was hard enough as it is, and bringing Gohar in. And then coming up with the assessments, which was my goal, would have been probably another year's worth of work that I just alone, which I couldn't do. So I used tools that were out there that in different ways, and perhaps they were intended to be used, but actually they work quite well for some of the, or most of the areas that we look at in the book. Also, once you do that maturity assessment, you want to do an automation maturity assessment to understand that if you're going to put all this energy into web analytics, you'll definitely want to scale your marketing. And, for that, you need automation. So the question is how, and you'll need that content queued up and customized. So you'll really need that. And then, of course, you're going to need the question is, and we experience this many organizations, is just how aligned is the sales arm and the marketing arm? Usually they're not. As much as I like to think they are, they're not aligned at all, in a lot of cases. And sometimes they use different metrics, and they, there's cross purposes. And, in a small organization, it might be easier to make alignment. In a big organization, like a big conglomerate, they're probably not, the left hand probably doesn't even know what the right hand's doing, and trying to figure out that all. So there's an assessment here to help you do that. And then, of course, because we know that personalized content's more effective usually, there's an assessment for that, and usually you're going to need vendors for that. So we have an assessment for that. And with that, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to end this first video. Cheers. And again, go buy the book if you want to know more.